Today we're going to talk about classifying triangles. So we can either classify triangles by angles or by sides. If we classify triangles by angles, we're going to look at whether or not it has an obtuse or a right angle, and then we'll look at if the angles are congruent or not. So your first option is if your triangle has 3 acute angles, then it's called an acute triangle. If your triangle has 1 obtuse angle, and that's all it can have, the other 2 have to be acute, then it's called an obtuse triangle. If your triangle has 1 right angle, then it's called a right triangle, and the other 2 angles in here would be acute as well. And if your triangle has 3 congruent angles, it's called equiangular. Equiangular. Similar to equilateral, which we'll see in a minute, but equiangular. If we look at the diagram, we are going to find each of these triangles that we're being asked. And so triangle CDE is this triangle right here, CDE. And I'm noticing that angle E in this triangle is labeled as a right angle. That means this is a right triangle. Okay, then we'll look at triangle BCE, this triangle right here. And this angle, angle C, is bigger than 90 degrees, and so that is an obtuse triangle. Okay, then triangle ABE is right here, and we have all angles are marked that they are congruent, so this is an equiangular. Triangle BDE is right here, and I knew that this angle was a right angle, so then this whole angle has to be more than 90 degrees, so this is also an obtuse triangle. And finally, triangle CFE. Okay, this angle I know is less than 90. This angle is not marked that it's congruent to anything, and it's still less than 90. And this angle right here, same thing, not marked that it's congruent to anything, and it's an acute angle. So this is an acute triangle because all 3 angles were acute. We can also classify triangles by sides. So if a triangle has 3 congruent sides, that's equilateral. 2 congruent sides, then we call that triangle isosceles. And no congruent sides, we call that triangle scalene. One way that you can remember this, and it's kind of silly, equilateral starts with E, and it has 1, 2, 3 lines in the letter E. Isosceles starts with the letter I, and we have 2, and we're only looking at horizontal lines. So we have 2 horizontal lines, that means 2 congruent sides, so in the first letter. Then if we look at scalene, it starts with an S, and there are no horizontal lines here, so no congruent sides in your triangle. Just a funny way to remember, but hopefully that helps. Okay, so we're going to have to use the diagram and how it's marked. 1 hash mark means that all 3 of those sides are congruent. 2 hash marks means that these 2 sides are congruent to each other, but not necessarily to the one with just 1 hash mark. Okay, so triangle JKM is this big triangle right here. And I don't know enough information about this side or this side to make any determination about if they're congruent. Nothing is marked, so I can't assume that. So this triangle would be scalene because it has no congruent sides. Triangle KLN is this triangle right here, the small triangle in the middle. And this has two sides that are congruent, and they are marked with the two hash marks. This third side is not necessarily congruent, so we call this triangle isosceles. And finally, triangle JKN is this triangle right here, and we see that all three sides are marked congruent, so this is an equilateral. Okay, so right now you pause the video and try 9 through 14 and then resume the video to check your answers. You're classifying each triangle by angle and side. So within the same triangle, you're going to classify what we call it by its angles and by its sides. Okay, so you can go ahead and check those classifying. Hopefully that was pretty straightforward. And you'll notice that for all equilateral triangles, they're also equiangular and vice versa. So they are kind of a special class of triangles. If your triangle is equiangular, then it's equilateral, and if the triangle is equilateral, then it is equiangular. The other classifications do not really follow that same pattern, but that is one way that you can make sure you always have the equilateral triangles. Okay, so in 15 through 20, we're using the fact that segment PR bisects angle SRT. So I'm going to find PR is right here, and it bisects this angle SRT. That means that this angle that's 30 degrees has to be congruent to this angle. So I'm going to go ahead and write that. That's just the definition of a bisector, so that's 30 degrees. I know that's a little bit hard to see. Okay, so if that's 30 degrees, I'm just going to fill in this diagram to make it a little bit easier once I start classifying. So this angle is 30 degrees. This angle is 120 degrees. Then I know the third angle in the triangle has to add up to 180. So this is 150. So this also needs to be 30 degrees. Okay, this triangle is already filled in. I know 120, this angle right here, angle TUQ, is a linear pair, so they also have to add up to 180. So I know that this angle has to be 60 degrees. If this angle is 60 and this angle is 60, then they add together to be 120, so that means this angle has to also be 60 degrees. I could have also used the fact that this is a right angle, and if this is a right angle, then this is a right angle and this is a right angle also, so I knew that these had to add up to 90. I am going to use that information to fill in this, my right angle symbol. And then I'm going to see what else I can determine from the triangles. These two angles are not labeled and not easily found, so we are just going to see if we can classify the triangles. So first, if we look at triangle UQR, okay, this triangle does have an obtuse angle, so it's an obtuse triangle. If I look at the angles, and the sides are marked for me, so I have two congruent sides, which makes this isosceles. So now with this information filled in and the first one done, go ahead and pause the video and try classifying the remaining triangles. Okay, so go ahead and check your answers, and hopefully that was not too difficult. Classifying should be pretty straightforward. You just have to memorize the different names and what they mean. Okay, now we are going to classify triangles. You might be given 3 coordinates in the coordinate plane that form a triangle, and you have to classify it. So the only way that we're going to be able to classify that is by sides. So we're going to need to use the distance formula to find each side length. So if I want to find side length of JK, then I'm going to use the distance formula. So the distance equals, it's going to be x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Okay, then I'll do -9 minus -7, that's plus +7, so this is -2 squared plus 1 plus +7 is going to be 8, so that's going to be 8 squared, and that is 4 plus 64, which is the square root of 68. I'm not going to worry about getting a decimal or even simplifying this radical because I'm only using it to compare to the other side lengths, so everything else is going to be a radical as well, so it's going to be really easy to compare the radicals because we're just seeing if any of them are congruent. So next I'll try KL, and I'm going to use point K and point L for this one. So we'll do x2, which is -1 minus -9 squared plus -1 minus 1 squared. So -1 minus -9 is -1 plus +9. So this is going to be 8 squared plus, this is -1 minus 1, which is -2. -2 squared, which is also 64 plus 4, which is 68. So I know this triangle at least has 2 congruent sides. Okay, the last side that I need to check is side JL. Those are the only 2 points, or combination of 2 points, that I haven't used. So the distance here is the square root of, it's going to be -1 minus -7 squared plus -1 minus -7 squared. Okay, this is plus positive. This is going to be the square root of 6 squared plus, same thing, 6 squared. That is the square root of 36 plus 36, which is 72. So I see that only 2 of these sides are congruent, so this is isosceles. Okay, at this point you can pause the video and resume to check your answers. Okay, so take this time to check your answers. Make sure that you write down any questions you have, and we'll go over them in class next time.